Yeah, so where do things currently stand? Well, I suppose when this crisis occurred, my great fear was that which is typically the case, and I'm going to be pretty open and frank here in terms of my commentary, but I think part of our challenge within government is that whilst everybody likes to look at tourism and likes to talk about the great success that it's been, they don't not typically so keen to put money behind the industry. You know, and our budget, when I compare it to that of Fáilte Ireland's, is a fraction of theirs. So my concern at the outset was if we don't give tourism some visibility in the midst of all of this, we could get lost in the maelstrom of, I suppose, the challenges it's going to face every sector of the economy. So I approached the minister not long after she had taken up post and asked her if she would be prepared to chair a steering group. And the purpose of that was really to put the minister in a position whereby she was seen to be championing the industry, but at the same time, you know, from my perspective, she couldn't be seen to be doing that, but not put sort of commitment and a financial commitment behind supporting the industry to do what it needed to do. So she agreed to that, and she set up this. She asked us to set up this infrastructure. So we've got a steering group which the minister chairs. It is mostly populated by senior civil servants across departments who have got an input into tourism. So there will be senior people from DFE. We have got representation from DERA, Department of Communities, Department of Finance, Department of Infrastructure, because they all feed in to the delivery of tourism. And we also then have industry representation. It's not as wide as I would like it to be, but Joanne Stewart is there as Chief Executive NITA. Colin Neal is there as Chief Executive Hospitality Ulster. And we also have got Janice Galt as the CEO of the Hotel Federation. And alongside that is myself and Nell Gibbons from Tourism Ireland. And we also have Katie Best there from City Airport. The reason that Katie is there is because she's our representative on Visit Britain and is our key sort of contact point between what Visit Britain are doing in the international marketplace and ourselves. So that is the steering group. The working group, for the most part, consists of 10 chairs who are people who are heading up various work streams. And those 10 work streams basically look at a range of areas. And the reason that we've tried to bring everybody together around one table is to recognize the fact that tourism is an ecosystem and no one of these areas is independent. And there is an interdependence and everyone has to work together for tourism to be a success. And what we tried to do is, where a group existed, we've tried not to reinvent the wheel and create another group. So one of the sectors looks at hospitality. So there's a working group that Colin Neal sort of leads that looks at the hospitality sector. So we have the chair of that, Brian Murphy, chairing the subgroup. Similarly, we have got Stephen Meldrum, who's the chair of the Northern Ireland Hotel Federation, looking after the accommodation sector. But doesn't just represent hotels, represents B&Bs, represents other sectors within the accommodation side. We have got Una O'Reilly from the ICC looking after business tourism. Just trying to remember everyone's names and who's doing what. Adrian Doyle from the ICC is looking after venues and major events. Aileen Martin from the Hastings Group is looking after the golf segment. Who else do I have? I have got the chair of the City of Derry Airport, Albert Harrison, is looking after R&C connectivity. Road connectivity is being looked after by Karen McGill from Boston Coach NI. And I think I may have Laura McCorry is looking after attractions, And then we have a guy from Belfast Food Tours who is looking after the small attraction side. So for each of those areas, we have got a what we've called the task and finish group, which is a group of people coming together to identify the key issues, key constraints that people are trying to address, and potential solutions to those, and identifying what the financial requirements might be to sort those out. So what we've tried to do through those task and finish groups is to make sure that we have got regional spread, and we have got all of the industry represented, and as far as possible, making sure that we have got both the larger players and the smaller players as far as we can represented at the table through the chairs of each of those groups. The working group has met now on 3 occasions, and there are 6, I would say, key themes which are really coming out of that. One is the need for a clear timeline for the opening of the industry, and we can talk about that. One is around the guidelines that need to be put in place in order to allow that to happen. We'll say a little bit more about that. The third is around a charter mark to give assurance to the general public. 4 is around a marketing campaign. 5 is around sentiment analysis, and I'll let Gary deal with that. And then 6 is really around the financial ask that is coming from a whole range of sectors that we then wish to put to the Minister. So as I say, the group has met 3 times, and the working group meets again on the 17th of June. The Minister, the steering group will meet on the 19th of June, but there is an important date before that, which is the 18th of June, which I will explain to you what that is. So those are what's coming across as the key issues that the group is then advising the ministerial group on. The big ticket issues have been so far is the timetable for opening. So I think it's important that people understand, and I explain the process that we go through in that, because it's not as simple as it might appear. So as you know, we now have a date for the opening of tourism accommodation, which is the 20th of July. The Minister had hoped to have all of that opened up much more quickly than that. Our intention was to have that open by the 5th of July. And once we had agreement around that, we would then move to opening up the rest of the industry in parallel with that. When she first took that to the executive wasn't prepared to accept that date. And over the course of the weekend before last, myself, Anya Kearney, who works for me, a couple of officials within the department, we put together a very detailed submission, which was then submitted to the executive on the Monday. So the process is that the Minister basically informs the executive that she wishes the executive to consider relaxation of some of the current restrictions. A detailed proposal to support that has to be put together. It's very detailed. I mean, our proposal came to about 25 pages. And what we need to do is we need to convince the Minister for Health, in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, that the proposal should be considered by the executive. So we put together let's say, an evidence piece, and we submit that to the Department of Health. The Minister consults then with the Chief Medical Officer, and he then puts a recommendation to the executive. So when we produced our paper, we had consulted with other political parties, and we had consulted with the Chief Medical Officer over the weekend, and we had initially planned to have self-catering and other types of facilities, guest accommodation, open before the 20th of July. The Chief Medical Officer wasn't happy with that and wouldn't accept it. And it was apparent that the only date acceptable was going to be the 20th of July for all sectors at that point in time. So in order to make sure we got our foot in the door, we put our submission in and basically asked that the executive consider all types of accommodation to open on the 20th of July. Because if we had put anything other than that in, the Chief Medical Officer just wouldn't have accepted it and it wouldn't have been approved. What we still would like to be able to do is to convince the executive that certain types of accommodation could open sooner than that. So we are in the process of developing another very significant paper for the Minister to present to the executive on the 18th of June, which is the next time we can make a presentation to the executive. And that is a timetable for the opening of all elements of the industry. Now, there is a question as to whether or not that will include pubs, but we want to make sure that it does cover all types of accommodation, visitor attractions, restaurants, and anything else really that we feel, or we get an indication that the Chief Medical Officer is prepared to accept. So ideally, we would like to see all of those things open by the 20th of July, because we feel if someone is coming to a hotel, we really need things for people to see and do. So we would like to be able to make the argument that all attractions should be open by that stage as well. That would be our objective. And we also want to make sure that if someone is coming to a hotel, that they can at least eat in the restaurant in the hotel, and be served alcohol if needs be at their table in the restaurant. So that is what we would like to do, and we would like to be in a position for that to be considered by the executive on the 18th of June. Alongside that, there's been a huge amount of work done on guidance. Fáilte Ireland released their guidance yesterday. We have been working very closely with both Visit Britain, Visit England, Scotland, Visit Scotland, Visit Wales, and Fáilte Ireland in terms of drawing up draft guidance for the industry here. We've done that in consultation with other organisations like the Hotel Federation, Hospitality Ulster, who've been working in concert with Hospitality UK. Our expectation is that the UK guidance, final draft of that, will be available hopefully around the 13th of June. And we would like to be in a position to have a final draft of any guidance that we would be putting in place very as soon as possible thereafter. And if at all possible, I would like that to be done on the same day. But we absolutely would like to be able to present the final version of that guidance to the working group on the 17th of June. But it will not be significantly different from Fáilte Ireland's in terms of, I suppose, what the expectations might be of the various segments of the industry, because everybody is facing the same challenge. Everybody's looking at what's been best practice internationally, and the guidance that you will find coming is not that different. I suppose the big issue for everyone, in truth, is the whole issue of social distancing and what level of social distancing can apply. And certainly the chief medical officers in the UK and in Ireland at this point are still insistent that that distance is 2 meters. But interestingly, the conversation that is being had is not about can it move to 1. It's more about an issue of when it can move to 1 meter. So, you know, that guidance has to be flexible and has to be written in a way that it can change as and when, you know, the R rate goes down, or we've got, you know, greater evidence to support the movement of social distancing. And Anya Kearney and a couple of her team have put a huge amount of effort into getting the guidance to where it is, working in partnership with Colin Neal and his people in Hospitality Ulster and the Hotel Federation, with again our counterparts in the Republic, and organisations like the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, who'd be doing stuff around visitor attractions and such like. So we would like to think that that will be in place and signed off again for that executive meeting on the 18th of June. So barring any sort of major issues arising, you know, that is when we would like to see very significant movement in terms of decisions being taken. And ideally, I would like us to be in a position whereby the dates which apply in Northern Ireland are the same as those which apply in the Republic, if we possibly can get to that stage. For obvious reasons, we don't want to see any part of Northern Ireland being at a disadvantage in comparison to our counterparts in the south. But I mean, I would stress that, you know, that is not necessarily simply in the, you know, in the under the control of our minister. You know, those are decisions which have got to be taken and agreed by everyone around the executive table. So there's a lot of work has to go on in terms of making sure that not just one political party, but all of the political parties are comfortable with the advice that's coming forward. And there is a nervousness because I think the view of the chief medical officer is that the R rate is not as low as the medics would like it to be, and they are seriously concerned about the risk of a return to a +1 environment. So we need to be sure that the guidance that we give and the commitment that's given by the industry is such that we give confidence to the medics, because they will and do have a very significant influence in terms of how the politicians think about all of this. You had asked then, Mary, if I'd say something a little bit about the kite mark. I think people want to move away from the idea of a kite mark, and this. I mean, I think the sense is that this should be a I don't want to say self-certification, but it's we're asking the industry to basically sign up and commit to delivering on aligned to the guidance that it will be made available for that particular sector in which they operate. So the idea is that you will be able to go online, that you will be able to basically answer a number of questions, that you make a commitment, and then you can use like a charter mark, for want of a better word. And that will be then subject to significant spot checking, either by a third party who we would either engage to undertake that on our behalf, or by Tourism NI ourselves. I suppose the department is a little bit nervous about where that might place us in terms of any, legal challenges or potential for legal challenges. So those legal issues are now being thrashed out. It will probably be it'll probably align with the rest of the UK, principally because we have got, our legislative system and our processes are somewhat different to those in the Republic. And the Republic, I think, Fáilte Ireland are minded to take a more sort of, let's say, a stronger line in terms of the enforcement of the mark that they are planning to put in place. But either way, the World Tourism and Travel Council is going to have a standard that applies globally, and hopefully both will sort of meet that standard, and then both will have a WTTC accreditation for those schemes. So they will be seen to have equal weight in the marketplace when Tourism Ireland are out doing the promotion. So do you want to stop at that point, Mary, and I'll because there's a lot there. And take any questions on that before we go on to things like marketing and some of the other issues that you wanted me to just pick up on.
That's fine, John, no problem. Would anybody like to comment or ask any questions? If you just want to raise your hand, Hugh there has the controls.
Give me a wee wave there if you want to. Oh, you're in trouble now. Go on ahead there, Claire.
Hello, I'm from restaurant background, and I'm just wanting to know that in line with us getting opened in restaurants and even for hospitality industry, is there going to be any thought to a reduction in the VAT amount to bring us in line with other countries?
Well, certainly that's something we would lobby for. I understand that the UK government are talking about coming forward in a couple of weeks' time with a stimulus package, and one of the things that's potentially being looked at is a reduction in VAT. So that is a distinct possibility, but as you know, Claire, that's an issue for the Treasury and for the government at Westminster, and one that we don't have control over. But certainly, would we be supportive of that? And is that something that the Minister would lobby for? The answer to that is absolutely yes. So the next 2 or 3 weeks will tell a tale on that. But there is a very strong lobby coming in from the UK hospitality seeking for a reduction in VAT right across the UK, because at 20%, the VAT level is way in excess of virtually every other part of Europe. And there is a distinct possibility that we will see VAT levels in the south potentially go back to 9%, or maybe even below that, as is the recommendation from their working group.
Anybody else? Mary is on there, yep.
I'll unmute myself. Hi, thanks, John, very much. As Mary said, thanks very much for doing the webinar this morning with us.
Welcome, Mary.
I sit on the task and finish group for the attractions, and I find it very useful. I'm representing the larger attractions within the council area, and yesterday we received the Fáilte Ireland guidelines, which are very useful, and maybe something Mary and I can share with this group after this. Just one of the questions that we wanted to ask, and I know Brian from Seamus Heaney Home Place and Joanne from Hill of O'Neill's on, we have cafes within our attractions as well, John.
Yes.
And I know by speaking to Emer and the Titanic, what they're going to try and do is a takeaway service. But is that something you are looking at? Because I know you're hoping to align everything to the 20th of July for opening our attractions with the accommodation. But just to keep that in mind too, John, that whenever you're speaking about cafes and whatever within facilities, can they open and operate as normal, or what's happening there? Or?
Well, part of the reason why we would like to be able to convince the CMO and others that that would be doable, because we do recognise that, the hotels have restaurants as well, as do visitor attractions. The big challenge for most people is going to be the social distancing piece, and what you can actually do and how many people you can actually serve. So there's significant work to be done around that. But our expectation would be that the guidance which would apply to a restaurant would apply to a restaurant within a facility when that comes out. And again, sort of say, probably, I haven't read the guidance that came out from Fáilte, but that will not be a million miles away from anything that's going to come, down the road from ourselves or DFE or whoever that happens to come from.
That's grand. Thank you, John.
Anybody else there? Any questions? Give me a wave.
John, if I could just make a comment on the charter or the kite mark.
Yeah.
I work with the trade task and finish group, and there was probably quite a strong expression. We had our meeting yesterday evening actually on it, that the kite mark, or whatever we Northern Ireland will have, should perhaps align as closely as possible to that of down south of the Republic of Ireland. Obviously with the tour operators, it's really key, because a lot of our business is coming in from, via Dublin and so on. So that idea of the all island approach came across very, very strong in our meeting yesterday evening.
Yeah, and I think part of our challenge, Mary, as you might imagine, is trying to find that balance, when you've got two legal jurisdictions, but recognizing the fact that, we are very much part of an all island offer, and trying to come to some conclusion as that, and like, to be brutally honest, there are politics in the midst of all of this as well that we need to work through, but we're trying to make sure people are as pragmatic as we possibly can be. And I think one of the reasons why we went for the date of the 20th of July was to align ourselves with the south. And then on Friday of last week, we got the announcement that everything in the Republic was moving from the 20th of July to the 29th of June. So we will probably try to do that as well. And I think part of the challenge is that there are, The legals around some of this stuff as well differ because of the different jurisdictions and who does what and how things get done. But I mean, we would want to make sure from a marketing point of view, you know, that they were, whilst the sign might be slightly different, that the content is the same. And as I said, if we can, assuming that the WTTC recognition will apply, if that applies globally, people will probably put more store in that sort of global trademark, for want of a better word, than, you know, a whole range of local ones. So, you know, we'd probably want to use that ultimately to sort of say that we reached that, you know, or whatever charter mark we're using, or that it aligns and is consistent with and has the approval of the WTTC. I would suspect, but we are not ignorant of the fact that we absolutely need to try and align as far as we possibly can with the rest of the island, because that's the experience that people have when they come here.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
And I think, in fairness, I mean, the feedback from that group I saw last night from the trade, it's fair to say for 2021, the level of interest is very high.
Yes, David Boyce, and again, I think David is going to share an executive summary. David Boyce from Tourism Ireland is chairing the group, and they had just done some consumer research across tour operators, and he just outlined the sort of the key points of it yesterday evening. I think he's going to share it, and I can share it into the group as well. But it was very, very positive, positively disposed towards travel into Ireland, and in particular into Northern Ireland. And certainly rural destinations are coming out very, very strong in that piece of research. So, you know, here in Mid-Ulster, obviously we're well placed for that. But I think David said he would share an executive summary of it, or maybe Emer will. So whenever we get that, we'll share that in.
Yeah, and I saw that last night. It's very promising. It does look very promising for 2021.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any comments before John continues? Okay, that's fine. Well, John,
I don't see anybody shaking their fists, so you're right there now. You get you going again. I'm going to mute everybody again. If you want to go on ahead, John.
Sorry, give me that, Hugh.
If you want to go on ahead there.
All right, okay. So the next thing I had here was, so try to cover the opening of the industry, the working group, the steering group, and the guidance and the kite mark. I mean, I haven't got into the detail of that. And what I would suggest is, if you really want to get into the detail of that at some point, Anya Kearney is probably the best person to have come along and take you through, you know, the practicalities of all of that, because she's been working with it on it in her sleep, basically. But just to say a little bit about what we're planning from a marketing point of view then. And you had Niall on, I understand. Has Niall presented to the group?
Niall's coming on next week.
All right, okay.
Good before him, John.
I don't want to steal his thunder, because he can tell you a lot more about what Tourism Ireland are doing. But I'll just talk about it very briefly, you know, so people have a full picture and he can get into the detail of it. Mm-hmm. So really, from a marketing perspective, and like the realistic expectation is that you know, demand is going to start in the domestic marketplace in the first instance. So for us, that is about making sure that we have got a relevant and a substantial campaign that can run across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, kicking off hopefully from July 1st. So we had aligned this with that 20th of July date, and we had agreed with our friends and colleagues in Fáilte Ireland that one would not try to steal a march on the other, and if we were going to run campaigns, we would both launch our campaigns at the same time. And we've been working closely with Fáilte, despite the fact we're going to be competing for pounds in people's pockets. So, for example, we are doing weekly sentiment analysis across the island, and we're jointly funding that, and we share that information between us, and we do that looking at the sentiment in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. And really, that's to allow us to get a sense of, you know, what the thought processes are for the consumer and what messages do we need to get across. So we are planning to run with a new campaign, basically driven by our Dublin-based marketing agency, BBDO, and it will be very much focused on encouraging people in the domestic market to, stay at home, support local businesses, support local jobs, and have a great time when you're doing it. And in the Republic, trying to get a message across that, and you'll all be familiar with the ROI sort of task force report and the work that's done there, making sure that people realise that Northern Ireland is not that far away, and that when you get there, there's lots of things to see and do. So the campaign is probably going to be based around the theme of, a small step to a giant adventure. And those of you who work for councils, I don't know, have we met Mid-Ulster Council yet, Mary? You may be the last on the list.
You're meeting Michael on Thursday.
Thursday, yeah. So we've been presenting this, the campaign, to each of the councils, because really what we want to do is to work closely with the councils and to make sure that if councils want to run campaigns, that they're aligned with the Embrace the Giant Spirit brand, and that we help the councils get as much reach as we possibly can for their money. So it's trying to make sure that, rather just simply running on councils platforms, which may not have the same visitor number visitations that we would, is giving visibility to all that, and looking at allowing councils to put their tourism websites onto a new platform that we're building, aimed at the consumer market. So Dave Vincent has been doing quite a bit of work in terms of how do we give access to that, and we're looking at how do we provide businesses with direct access to other channels in the market. So, directly into places like Booking.com or TripAdvisor or all of the OTAs, but we're also looking at a platform which we are looking to procure, which would allow us hopefully to provide opportunities for direct booking through the website. We need to be careful of state aid rules around that, but we think we've got a solution to that particular problem. But really it's about finding a means of cost effectively giving small tourism enterprises access to the market without necessarily having to go through your typical OTA, which is generally the channel that most consumers will use. So we have, and this is where I'm going to ask for your help here. Typically we have a budget to run 2 campaigns for 6 weeks in any one year. Our budgets have not been increased. We asked for an additional £5.5 million to allow us to compete with Fulcha, who have a budget for 40 weeks. We all know that there are very significant pressures on the executive's budget, and there will be lots of people in asking politicians for money for a whole raft of things. We need the tourism industry lobbying as hard as it possibly can to make sure that the resources that is needed to allow it to secure as much business as possible is, that those arguments are made. So my conversation that I just had on the phone was about resubmitting the bid which we had put into the department, because I'm not happy that it wasn't supported. And I've spoken to the Minister in the SPAD, and we are going to resubmit again and ask for that to be reconsidered. But there's huge demand on the executive's money. The executive is undoubtedly overspent at this point. I mean, Conor Murphy has talked about certain government departments who have basically expended their year's budget by the end of May. So we're in a dogfight with everybody else for access to finance. So we really need the industry to be as, whatever influence you have with your local politicians. I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm going to say it. Like, you need to fight your corner, and if we get more money to market, it means we're more visible. We are going to be visible for a longer period of time, and hopefully as a result of that, the more business we can bring in your direction. And one of the reasons that we've tried to work closely with the councils is to make sure that our collective resources are put to the maximum use. That we're not competing with each other, that we're not coming out with mixed messages, that we are not putting the same ads out or campaigns out at the same time, aimed at the same people, and not making the best use of those resources. So the more we can get for marketing, the more marketing we will do, because we recognize that everyone is dependent upon the domestic market at this point in time, and that's really critical. Tourism Ireland, in the meantime, they've just completed a major procurement exercise for to the tune of £1 million to basically engage someone to do consumer research over the course of the next 18 months. So Tourism Ireland can get a sense of what messaging it needs to make and which sectors of the market it should target in each of its core markets. And it already has initial feedback from GB, France, Germany, United States, and some of the other markets. And it's clear that I suppose where this virus has taken hold greatest and has been around longest, the confidence to travel by air is there is a direct correlation between the two. So places like Germany, for example, people are much more willing to travel and much more willing to travel overseas at this point than, say, Italy or in particular the United States. Consumer feedback coming from the United States is people aren't even comfortable traveling domestically, never mind traveling internationally. So the expectation is that, and Niall will take you through this in detail as he always does. Their first protocol is going to be GB, then Europe, and then the United States, and really not seeing the United States coming back in any volume until certainly, hopefully in 2021. But I think the view is we will not see numbers like we had in 2019 probably until 2024 or 2025. Partially because the air routes aren't there and they're going to take a very significant period of time to come back. And the consumer confidence isn't what we would like it to be. Now, hopefully if we continue to move in the direction that we're moving, that consumer confidence will improve. But really what we need to do is, I suppose, focus on GB, and Tourism Ireland probably will start to do that August, September time. I do think they will come under pressure to do some stuff before then, but in reality, there is, in the UK, I think because of the number of deaths and the fact that we're still easing out of lockdown, there's still a reluctance in the UK to travel, beyond getting into your own car and being able to drive, to Cornwall or Scotland or wherever. There is a real reluctance to get on a plane there still. So it is a difficult picture for this year, but as Mary was saying, the research that has been done, I sat in a meeting with the minister with about 20 tour operators in the United States, and certainly, there have been a lot of cancellations, but not, people have cancelled and have rebooked for next year, as opposed to basically seeking to have their cancelling their booking altogether. It's been more of a postponement, and we've certainly seen that in golf. So Royal Portrush, Royal County Down are absolutely sold out for 2021. And as Mary said, the work that David Boyce has been doing with the incoming tour operators would suggest that the level of interest is not as high as it would have been, but probably sitting at 80% in some places of what it would have been in 2019. So we also are running with our partnership marketing campaign again this year, and we have got an agreement from the department that we can increase our level of contribution on that to, I think it's 75%, and what we're encouraging as many people as they can to make use of that fund. we would like to have made it higher, but our budgets don't allow us to do that. So ideally we would want to be asking companies and small businesses to have to make as small a contribution as possible, given that we all recognise you've had no income, for the past 6 months. So we have risen that to 75%, which is it's as far as we can take it at this particular point. But that is there for you guys to use, and we would encourage you to utilise it. Again, we're running that through the Hotel Federation because our legislation, as it currently stands, does not allow us to give more than a 30% contribution to any private entity. So we're having to use, let's say, innovative means of getting the money out in order to allow us to give a bigger contribution than our legislation allows us to at this point.
And I think on that, John, there's a call to action for trade, for businesses and so on, coming out hopefully this week. And I certainly get that information, and that's open to all accommodation. I think it used to be maybe just hotels and so on, since the Northern Ireland Hotels Federation were running it, but it's open now to...
It's open to all accommodation, all attractions, and all experience providers.
That's right. Yeah.
Just a quick question, John. You spoke about the airlines. Is there much talk about cruise ships aren't usually much used to us in Ulster, but the ferries, if we're going to target the GB market, what way are they going to be coming into the country? Yeah,
so we have been talking to the ferries, and the ferries do present an opportunity because people can travel by car. The problem that the ferries have at the moment are twofold, maybe threefold. One is social distancing, which means that they can only take a fraction of the passengers that they would like. They see a huge opportunity in the visiting friends and family, or friends and relatives segment of the market, but people aren't clear if they can actually go and stay. Well, at this point in time, they can't go and stay with friends and relatives. So until that issue gets resolved, that presents a problem in the marketplace. And those are the two fundamental issues that they've got. They do think there's a pent-up demand there, and once it's clear that people can travel and people can stay with their friends and relatives, then they think things will start to move. But ideally, they would also like to see the social distancing issue being addressed by that point in time as well. Because I think currently Stena Sea Line, for example, can only operate at 40% of their, I think in fact it's only 30% of their normal capacity at this point because of those social distancing rules.
Does that include the likes of the freight and whatnot?
Sorry, Hugh?
Does that include the likes of the lorry men and whatnot? Is that 30%?
Well, most of the guys who are traveling currently are, freight guys. I mean, the number of consumers who are traveling is really minimal. I mean, they are losing money hand over fist. They are losing large sums of money at the moment because of that.
Is there anybody else any questions there? Go on ahead there, Dermot.
How you doing, John? Dermot Free here. I was just wondering there, is there a template letter that the Tourist Board can provide for us that we can lobby our local ministers?
I would need to be very careful about giving templates to people to go and lobby ministers who we supposedly work for, but I'm sure if you speak to Mary, the council might be able to provide you something of those lines, or even the group.
But the council might do that. Maybe we could bang our heads together and put something out there.
But I mean, sometimes it's better, to seek a meeting with your local politicians. There's no reason why you couldn't invite some of your MLAs to engage in this process and have a conversation with them and keep them up to speed as to where the local industry is and the issues affecting them. And let them form their own, come to their own conclusions. Because you probably have some representation from your area on the executive, I would imagine, and some potentially, on a number of relevant committees. So there are people there who I'm sure you could talk to.
Right. Okay.
I think a lot of us have been talking to the MLAs there because in this area, quite a few people didn't get any of the grants.
Yeah, I do think that is important.
Fell through crack after crack, and it's quite a substantial amount of people actually. But Ulster, generally for tourism and even for manufacturing, is a lot of SMEs, a lot of sole traders, a lot of innovative products, both in tourism and manufacturing over the years, and just seem to fall through crack after crack after crack.
Yeah.
Which is a bit disheartening, to be fairly honest. But if that avenue is that avenue still open for debate, or is that avenue closed now? Or
Sorry, Hugh, I'm finding you hard to hear.
can you is the grant the grants are the grants dead now? Or will there be any more grants coming out? Or
Well, we made a pitch for money. Rosemary put a very substantial proposal together, basically asking for money to provide support to small businesses to develop, I suppose, recovery plans. And she also made a very substantial bid for money to implement those plans. And as things currently stand, we've been given the money to help develop the plans, but we've been given no money to help the businesses implement the plans. So again, that's something that we want to go back to the politicians on and sort of say, like, I mean, when I spoke to Mike Brennan, the Perm Sec, about this last week, my expression was, "You've given me a 5-gallon drum of petrol and no car to put it in." So we will go back and we will make an argument around providing more support for the sector, because we think that that's what we absolutely need to do. It's not about money for us; it's about money that can be made available to the industry, and critically at this point in time, to help it survive, to do the things it needs to do over the next number of months, to generate whatever business it can, to minimize its costs, and hopefully pull itself through until such times as we see greater volumes of people coming along next year.
yeah, we've got a question in there, John. Is what's the plan for a second wave if it happens? Or is
Well, I suppose our hope is that there isn't one, because I think if we do have a second wave, it could be quite catastrophic from a tourism perspective, because any confidence that we've built up with the consumer will, very rapidly disappear, and people will start to become fearful. So, I think, in fairness to the politicians, they have a very difficult task in making sure that, we open up as far as we can in order to allow business to become as normal as possible, but making sure that that's done in a way that we don't run the risk of, a very substantial risk if this were to reignite. But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's down to each and every individual to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, politicians can only do so much, and they'll not want to put people into lockdown and get back to where we were, because the consequence of this has been absolutely catastrophic. When you look at, every month is the equivalent of like the recession that we had, at a decade ago, and we're now into this, 3 months. So the implications and the impact of this is going to be absolutely huge, and we can't afford for it to be any worse.
Anybody else? We have to let John go now in a couple of minutes. Anybody else? Any comments? Dermot, come back in.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog the screen, but John, that wider committee that you're on there as regards, the 2 metre distancing, surely the industry attractions, be it restaurants and that there, we can't operate at 2 metres, so is that the general feeling in that committee? Yes,
it is. I mean, and that is the, I suppose, the argument that's being made. And, people like Colin Neal have been out very vociferous around that, as has, Janice Galt and others, in that if you operate at 1 metre, you can get 70% of your capacity in through the door. If you're operating at 2 metres, it's 30%. And for 30%, the vast majority of restaurateurs, bar owners, that means opening up to lose money, and no one's going to do that. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see where things are in a couple of weeks' time in Italy and France and other places where they've applied 1 metre and 1.5 metres. And I think if that results in, doesn't result in another spike or an increase in the number of cases, I think that will give everybody confidence. And if that's the case, then I think the medics will be prepared to move in that. But I mean, it's interestingly, you know, the medics are always going to argue for 2 meters because they're just going to make things as safe as they possibly can. Politicians have got to take the decision about, you know, around the impact on the economy and the risks that are involved in that. So they're in a difficult space. You know, I wouldn't like to be in their shoes, I have to say.
Yeah, we'll bring Mark Burgess in there. I know you have to go soon, John. Go on ahead there, Mark.
John, just like to congratulate you because there's some good news for the industry this morning. They have announced a virtual Meet the Buyer between the 28th and the 31st of July.
Yes.
That's a huge step forward, and congratulations on that. So we really appreciate the hard work that you are doing. I'm sure you get these things and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be harangued here today, but that's not the case. We are fully aware of the work you're doing for us, and we appreciate the support that you're giving us. And I think that should be said more often, truthfully.
Well, I think a point worth making there, Mark, is, I mean, all of this is done in collaboration, you know, and whilst we're, you know, whilst we obviously compete with Falch Ireland, we work in very close partnership where it makes sense. So, you know, Meet the Buyer is a good example of that, and getting this off the ground. And, you know, they're investing a huge amount of money on a new platform in order to allow this to happen, and we get the benefit of it. But like, our 3 management teams meet on a fortnightly basis and look to see how do we do things that are to our mutual benefit, that, you know, we ultimately recognize that we'll all, you know, you guys will want as much business as you can get, and clearly their sort of trade in the south are the same, but we recognize that people come to the island of Ireland, so, you know, the more we can work in partnership together, the better. And I think it's good that that's happening because, you know, the signs coming from the trade and the work that David Boyce has done is sort of suggesting that there is business to be had out there for, you know, next year and beyond. So it's good that we've been able to put Meet the Buyer on, and we'll have Explore GB, hopefully, which was supposed to take place this year, come along next year. And Emer will no doubt be continuing to try and drive forward the work that we've been doing with the trade, still working very closely with ITOA and their members, and trying to make sure we can secure as much business from those, you know, more distant markets in 21, 22 beyond.
Okay, John, could I just maybe we leave it there? I just want to thank you on behalf of the group for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time out. I know you're so busy. So just on behalf of this group and Mid-Ulster Council, thanks a million for doing that. We really appreciate you taking the time out.
Okay, and can I just say thank you for everybody giving up of their time, because I know everyone's busy, and like, my team really appreciate, Mary, all of the work that you and Mary and others are doing, and indeed the group are doing, and anything that we can do to help, we're more than happy to do that as we go forward, hopefully in a progressive way.
Absolutely, John, no problem. We'll keep ferrying the information out to these people and do whatever we can to support you. Thanks very much. Okay.
Well, good luck, everybody.
All the best. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Okay, bye.
Bye, bye.
Okay, we'll stay on here for a few minutes, just if anybody